very special. It's on the 25th anniversary of Quentin's passing, and this is one of his favorite little spots in the book. Tonight we have a substitute reader on number 4 in your program. Lawrence Watts is not here tonight. He was on his way from London to Boston for a business meeting in Boston. His plane was canceled. So Victoria Lewandowski will do his reading. Tonight, I don't know, it's just a very special thing. I'm afraid to talk about too much because I'll get too emotional. I'm like too emotional. But it's a very special evening. 25 years is spectacular. It doesn't seem like it's been gone 25 years. So tonight he's here with us, both on recording and in the things that we're reading and family. The theater tonight, if you make donations to the Gene Frankel Theatre, that'd be great because he's making this event very special. And I just should shut up and you guys do the reading. So the first person is Quentin's great niece, Michèle Goycoolea Pratt. I misspelled her last name. I know her by her other name. But Michèle Goycoolea Pratt, Quentin's great niece.
Hi. I'm definitely not worthy, but thank you for having me. When Quentin died, I read in the New York Times that he had no immediate survivors. This saddened me. Though perhaps technically correct, it left the impression that Quentin was in some ways alone in the world with no family. This is far from true. Though in public he would often say, "I do not hold with family," he knew we were all quite in love with him. Yes, he was a private person who spread his love horizontally, as he liked to say, and we respected that. But he was also an active participant in our lives. He often visited my parents and myself in what he called Doris Day Land, referring to New Jersey, of course. Once there, he would take off his shoes and hat, take a sip of whiskey, and purr, "How cozy," and with his trademark little chuckle, start to entertain us with his wit and wonderful stories about his remarkable life. Uncle Dennis, as he was known to us, attended our weddings and baptisms, Sunday dinners and card games. Personally, it was only once I turned 16 and saw him perform at Snafu's for the first time that I started thinking of him as Quentin. I also heard later he often spoke of his namesake, my youngest son, Ian Quentin, an indication to me that he was a little more family-oriented than he let on. To my son, a baby at the time, he wrote, "Inherit my name, but not my reputation." He later added, "Don't let the name give you any ideas," which they did. His letters to me were often signed, "Your very great Uncle Dennis." I love that. Another personal memory I cherish is that he once referred to me as a sophisticated woman in an unsophisticated setting. This was something I really needed to hear during that time that was primarily spent changing diapers, especially coming from Mr. Lifestyle himself. Also in Doris Day Land, he would set the neighbors' curtains aflutter by showing up to our book discussions. We were very into book clubs in the 90s, I don't know if you remember. What a surreal vision at the head of the table. It was amazing. His nieces, great and great-great-nieces and nephews, spanning over several continents and generations, would correspond with him regularly, and all made the pilgrimage to visit him in London or New York over the years. Here in New York, we would usually have lunch with him at the Cooper Square Diner, where he would happily enjoy what he described as tasteless food, and then we would help him with errands or groceries. We were also proud of him and revered him as the matriarch of our family. He was the last of a generation of extraordinary individuals, the true eccentrics of the Pratt lineage. He was also not the only one. We grew up with stories about him, his siblings, and his mother, that made us laugh and feel that we came from something special. My grandfather Louis, his brother, would address his letters to Quentin with the salutation, "Dear Sir or Madam," cross out which does not apply. His other brother Gerald would say things like, "For heaven's sake, don't laugh. People will think we're enjoying ourselves." And there was his beloved sister, Auntie Phil. She was the most non-judgmental person in the world. Despite being a vicar's wife in a small English country village, she always welcomed him in her home at a time that it would have been quite a scandal. It must have been a sight for sore eyes in the 50s to witness Auntie Phil in her Sunday best, her husband Uncle John in his dog collar after one of his famously profound theological sermons, and Uncle Dennis with his red or maybe purple hair and bare feet sitting around the table Sunday dinner at the vicarage. To be a fly on that wall. Auntie Phil was funny without trying to be. She had terrible arthritis when she got older. One time my mother asked her how she managed with such a condition, and she answered, "It's really not that bad, dear, except for feeding the cat." And my mother said, "What do you mean, Auntie Phil? How is that a problem?" And she replied, "Well, I can't bend down, so I have to drop the plate on the floor. Then the cat comes running, puts his head in the bowl, and I have to pour the food on his head." All these unique people made up our family. Quentin, of course, was the most outrageous, the bravest, and most talented of all. We loved him dearly. He was our warm, delightful, cozy uncle who enriched our lives. He lived and embodied his philosophy of being true to himself unflinchingly in a world of compromises and keeping up with the Joneses. He set a standard we could only strive to model. And that standard, of course, was to never keep up with the Joneses, but drag them down to your level. And I'm going to read one of my favorite passages from The Naked Civil Servant. It was I took a line from that and engraved it on a watch I gave my son when he graduated high school. Maybe you can guess which one that is. "From the dawn of my history, I was so disfigured by the characteristics of a certain kind of homosexual person that when I grew up, I realized that I could not ignore my predicament. The way in which I chose to deal with it would now be called existentialist. Perhaps Jean-Paul Sartre would be kind enough to say that I exercised the last vestiges of my free will by swimming with the tide but faster. In the meantime of which I'm writing, I was merely thought of as brazening it out. I became not merely a self-confessed homosexual, but a self-evident one. That is to say, I put my case not only before the people who knew me, but also before strangers. This was not difficult to do. I wore makeup at a time when even on women eyeshadow was sinful. Many a young girl in those days had to leave home and go onto the street simply to wear nail varnish. As soon as I put my uniform on, the rest of my life solidified around me like a plaster cast. From that moment on, my friends were anyone who could put up with a disgrace, my occupation any job from which I was not given the sack, my playground any cafe or restaurant from which I was not barred, or any street corner from which the police did not move me on. An additional restricting circumstance was that the year in which I first pointed my toes towards the outer world was 1932. The tidal wave started by the fall of Wall Street had by this time reached London. The sky was dark with millionaires throwing themselves out of windows. So black was the way ahead that my progress consisted of long periods of inert despondency, punctuated by spasmodic lurches forward toward any small chink of light that I thought I saw. In major issues, I never had any choice, and therefore the word regret had in my life no application. As the years went by, it did not get lighter, but I became accustomed to the dark. Consequently, I was able to move with a little more of that freedom which T.S. Eliot says is a different kind of pain from prison. These crippling disadvantages gave my life an interest that it would otherwise never have had. To survive at all was an adventure. To reach old age was a miracle. In one respect, it was a blessing. In an expanding universe, time is on the side of the outcast. Those who once inhabited the suburbs of human contempt find that without changing their address, they eventually live in the metropolis. In my case, this took a very long time. Thank you. And let's all hope we don't have to get accustomed to seeing in the dark in the coming years, and we all stay true to ourselves. Thank you very much.
My name is Cynthia Carr. It's an honor to be part of the celebration and commemoration of Quentin Crisp. I never knew him, but I used to see him around the neighborhood. We lived just a few blocks apart. He lived on what was known then as the Hells Angels block. And at one point I was told that the Hells Angels had decided to protect him. And I hope that's true. Anyway, this is the transcript of an interview with Quentin Crisp that was broadcast on BBC's third program on February 28, 1964. The broadcast led to the writing of his autobiography, The Naked Civil Servant, first published in London in 1968. And this is titled Exhibitionist. For the first 14 years of my life, I cried and was sick, and after that I had to think of some other way of drawing attention to myself. The real trouble was that as soon as I realized that my mother's love was to be divided fairly between the four of us, I flew into an ungovernable rage from which I have never fully recovered. But I did decide that the way to draw attention to myself was to live the life of a self-made beauty. Of course, this was very annoying to everyone. Even when you do it and are a woman, it's annoying enough. But when you're a man and you decide to exploit your looks, it's of course even more annoying. I knew I would have to pay a terrible price for this, but I didn't know exactly what price it would be. However, as the years have gone by, I've now been able to take an overdose of exhibitionism that would absolutely kill anyone who is starting out on their career. So that I can now say, I've been baptized by the fire, I've come out on the other side. The only trouble is that if you practice carefully almost every day of your life how to conceal your feelings about your public reception, you in the end become indifferent to what goes on. And this means that your life becomes boring. This, to my mind, absolutely unavoidable. If you fortify yourself against what might happen to you through any one course of action, you in the end become so fully fortified that you are incapable of receiving any impression from outside whatsoever. And now people say to me, what do you think of the dress I'm wearing? What do you think of the book I've written? I don't know, and this makes them cross, because they think this is another of my affectations. Once you're known to be affected, anything can be ascribed to your affectations. Having once adopted a flippant attitude towards almost everything, you find yourself then protesting your sincerity on occasion, and of course it no longer works. Everything you do and say can be laughed off, and you find you've lost your connection with the outer world altogether. You can only be turned on and off like a form of entertainment. It pays off in the sense that you can then become valuable as entertainment. You find that you can best exploit this by living the cafe life, so that though I've done various jobs, I didn't really come into my own and find the job, as Gibbon would say, that I was born to do, until I became a model. This combined the two things I would most have liked to be, a martyr and an actor. It's not that I'm actually masochistic, it's only that I find that it's very difficult to value anything that hasn't come to you through a certain amount of suffering. People are always saying to me, even in the art schools, when putting me in a terrible, difficult position for 8 hours, but then you love to suffer, don't you? My reply is not that I love to suffer, but that if we don't suffer, how shall we know that we live? This seems to me not to be masochism, but something which exists in almost all Puritan temperaments. That if a thing causes you some effort, then it becomes more worthwhile. Together with every pleasure, there is the desire to do without it. In order to be an artist model, you don't really require the things that the public imagine you must have. You don't require to be a great beauty. What you do require is, first of all, the same things that you would need in order to do any job on earth, such as to scrub the doorstep. You have to be punctual, you have to do it with a will, and you haven't to complain. In the school, which is where all modeling is done now, because private artists are really all abstract artists and don't require models, in fact would regard the model as a distraction. What you're required to do is to turn up, be on time, not complain, and not talk to the students. This isn't easy because the job as the years go by becomes boring. I can say of modeling that it's the only job I've ever had where I understood what I was doing, but after a bit it becomes less interesting, and then you have only your aches and pains to think about, your falling arches, your varicose veins. Other models have asked me what I think about when I'm posing. Evidently that means that they think about something else. I can only think about what I'm doing. If I think about anything else, then the pose crumbles, falls apart, relaxes. You've always got to pose much more than you imagine because students draw less than they see. Therefore, you're never merely standing, sitting, or lying. You are standing, sitting, or lying. You are standing, sitting, or lying like mad. You have to preserve attention all over your body. And even then, you can't keep the attention of the students. They not only talk, sing, play their guitars, make love, they even fight and roll about on the floor at your feet. So that finally you have to say, shall I get down? Have you finished now? This is due partly to the fact that they are students, that they're young, that they have their own life to live, and partly to the fact that all art is now more abstract. And this means that the keenness to learn to draw some complicated machine the way it is has passed forever. They are brought into the life room and kept there by the domination of the art master, not by the eagerness on their part. All I know of London is what I can call the reservation, that is to say, Soho. It's called the reservation in the sense that we are now able to live there protected, no longer shot at as though we were big game. We can do as we please. Most of the Soho life that I know is spent living in small cafes, which still exists in Soho. They used to exist in Chelsea, but Chelsea is now smart or pseudo-smart. King's Road, which once was full of small shops full of aniseed balls and dead wasps, is now full of clothes for women and clothes for men. And up and down the street walk debutantes, hoping to be mistaken for art students. In Soho, the people are still what you would call real. Their attitudes are not derived, or not derived to the same extent, and these people can be met in cafes, perfectly ordinary cafes open to the street, cafes where the old layabouts from the happy times still go, the people who are left over cold from the Café Royal. One of the interests of being an eccentric is that you can see borne out everywhere around you what you have actually lived for. You can see freedom in clothes come to the whole of London. I come from a time when people who wore suede shoes or green shirts were under suspicion. Now that time has gone forever. And this puts me in the mainstream when I started on the very edge. I would say that this freedom of dress is part of a bigger freedom, a freedom to do as you please, as long as it doesn't really make any difference to other people. I would say that the purpose of life now, for me, is to get into my grave without getting into debt. As far as I'm concerned, the purpose of life is to make a mad dash across open country and under fire between the cradle and the grave. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. I'm Lewandowski, and I've worked with Phillip Ward previously on an exhibit that was hosted by the Leslie Loman Museum. And in that exhibit, we had shown photographs, black and white photographs of Quentin Crisp that were taken by Martin Fishman. Thanks a lot. Okay. I'm reading Do You Believe in God by Quentin Crisp. Well now, the last time you know who was mentioned, I began by saying I wouldn't like to say anything that gave offense. And someone in the audience said, why stop now? But his is still something that worries me. So if at any moment anyone finds anything I say offensive, they have only to jump up and down, make a scene, and we will stop. I believe, like most people, not that of which logic can convince me, but what my nature inclines me to believe. This is so of nearly everybody. I am unable to believe in a God susceptible to prayer as petition. It does not seem to me to be sufficiently humble to imagine that whatever force keeps the planets turning in the heavens is going to stop what it's doing to give me a bicycle with 3 speeds. But if God is the universe that encloses the universe, or if God is the cell within the cell, or if God is the cause behind the cause, then this I accept absolutely. And if prayer is a way of aligning your body with the forces that flow through the universe, then prayer I accept. But there is a worrying aspect about the idea of God. Like witchcraft or the signs of the zodiac or any of these other things, the burden is placed elsewhere. This is what I don't like. You see, to me, you are the heroes of this hour. I do not think the earth was ever meant to be your home. I do not see the sky as a canopy held over your head by cherubs, or see the earth as a carpet laid at your feet. You used to live an easy, lying down life in the sea, but your curiosity and your courage prompted you to lift your head out of the sea and gasp this fierce element in which we live. They are seated on Mars with their little green arms folded, saying, "We can be reasonably certain there is no life on Earth because the atmosphere is oxygen, which is so harsh that it corrupts metal. But you learn to breathe it. Furthermore, you crawled out of the sea and you walked up and down the beach for centuries until your thigh bones were thick enough to walk on land. It was a mistake, but you did it. Once you have this view of your past, not that it was handed to you, but that you did it, then your view of the future will change. This terror you have of the atom bomb will pass. Something will arise which will breathe radiation if you learn to breathe oxygen. So you don't have to worry. Don't keep looking into the sky to see what's happening. Embrace the future. All you have to do about the future is what you did about the past. Rely on your curiosity and your courage and ride through the night."
Oh, yes? Yes. I'm all right, thank you. Oh, good heavens. Oh, that's wonderful. Oh, no, I think I was here, but I probably was having lunch with somebody. Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's marvelous. Lovely. I will. I will. Goodbye. What were your daydreams as a child? My daydreams as a child were of being a grown-up, very worldly, very beautiful woman. Those were my only daydreams. I played games of make-believe with the little girls in the neighborhood and made to play in my daydreams. And I can remember that when another girl, a stranger, was brought into the game, she said, "Let Mr. Crisp be a fairy prince." And the girl who knew me said, "Oh, Quentin never plays the part of boys or man." And it crossed my mind. Look, I didn't ever play the part of man. And the girl said, "Oh, well, I'll be a fairy prince then," because it didn't matter to her whether she played a male or female part. She didn't care because it was only a game. But to me it was more serious than a game. No, I didn't know it. It was a justification of my view of myself. That was really the only surprising thing that I can remember that happened when I was young and living my perpetual daydream. I was always this beautiful creature, and I don't remember ever meeting men or them falling in love with me or kissing my hand or anything like that. So it wasn't as Mr. That strange journalist who had the operation. Generally, said it was not a question of sex, it was a question of gender. I think it was one long daydream that I lived in up till at least the age of 11 or 12. I can remember my mother alternately tried to jolt me out of my dream and pandered to my being in it because she bought me ballet shoes. And now I think this is remarkable because I've never heard of a man wearing blocked toe shoes. But I remember I went to a dancing class and I was the only person who had ballet shoes, and I went up and down the room on my points. And I don't remember the mistresses stopping me or laughing or anything like that. So it's quite extraordinary that I did fulfill my dreams by sheer willpower, in spite of the world, in spite of everything. Because that was at a school when I was young enough to go to a school where there were boys and girls. And there I didn't play games. Oh yes, I remember they did play football and I refused to play. And I went out onto a field and they kicked the football at me. And I dodged it and never tried to kick it in any way or propel it anywhere. So yes, there was some penalty that I paid for my dream. But my mother must have given up and thought, well, that's the way it is. You see, when I was questioned about Dr. Watson in recent times, and said that a woman had the right to abort the fetus if she knew it was going to be a homosexual child. And everyone flew into such a terrible rage. I was allowed to live in a homosexual dream. And now, of course, nobody would be allowed to do that. So they would be better off not being born, which I pointed out to my agent. But she never understood it. She thought that I was punishing homosexuals by saying they could be aborted, but I was rewarding them. They didn't have to be born. This terrible life that I've lived, walking against the stream all the time, insisting on my dream in spite of everybody, they would have been spared that. So if I had been born a woman, of course none of this would have happened, and I would have been happy. Well, I would have been so unhappy. Of course, when you're on the outside looking in, it always seems that on the inside people are happy and you're on the outside. And when I sat in a cafe in England called the As You Like It, and said that the people going by looked into the cafe and thought we were happy, and that they were really happier than we. A man said, They're out there wishing they could be in here. And of course they are, because you want whatever you don't have. If the operation had been available and cheap when I was less than 25, I would have had it. Because then my life would have been simple. And I could have gone away and lived in Carlisle and run a wool shop, and no one would ever have known my terrible secret. I never understand why people who have the operation make themselves so conspicuous, so that they're as badly off as if it had never been. Because people don't look at them and say, they're homosexual, but they look at them and say, who really wants a man? And then, of course, everything is different. You're peculiar. I wanted to be part of real life without altering my dream of my own reality. And now, at the age of 90, it's been explained to me that I am not really a homosexual. I'm a trans something or other. And of course, it's my view of myself, not my view of man. I don't see myself as a man. I know I'm not a woman, of course, that I know perfectly well. And I don't dress as a woman, and I don't conduct myself. I did know a man who worked as a waitress for at least 6 months and changed into his uniform in a room where other women were changing and was never detected. So that's pretty amazing. But I don't think I could if I think my body is too like a man's body. So that I don't think I could have lived as a woman with any kind of success. I think I would have been anxious. That's the only thing I really wanted. Only to be a woman. Well, I wouldn't do anything differently because I was under compulsion to act as I did act. You see, people say, do you have any regrets? But you only have regrets if you have alternatives. If you can look back on your life and say, why did I marry that wretched woman? Why didn't I leave her and marry all those wonderful people over there? Or why did I stay in that job for so long? I could have left and got another one. But I had only the friends who could put up with the disgrace. I had the jobs from which I was not given the sack. I lived in the digs from which I was not evicted. So I didn't, looking back, have any alternatives. And so I don't regret anything. Well, the secret of looking young is, of course, never work. And of this I really believe in. I was asked this question by Mr. Rose. And when I said never work, he laughed nervously, so I think it was the wrong answer. But of course it is work that makes you look old, not only because you had to get up at 7:30 every morning and leave the house by 8:30 and get to the office by 9:30, but also it's the look of resentment that settles onto your face as you think, why do I have to work for them? And that makes you old. I've never worked in America at all. In America, you see, I didn't know until I got here. You can just do fame. It's what I call the profession of being. And that is how you earn a living. Chiefly you rely on the kindness of strangers. It's all your mother's fault. Your mother spent her life saying, well, you better learn because you'll be alone and people won't help you. Because people will help you. They want to help you. And you must look as helpless as you can. I was standing at a bus stop and a taxi drew up and said, get in, we'll take you as far as we go. And they were not going to charge me, and I got in. And a woman who I told the story said, they never do that to me. And I said, do you look helpless? And she said, no, of course I don't. But if you don't look helpless, how are you ever going to get help? And that I explained to you, that it does no good. You see, people are lonely. When the new towns were built in England, like Stevenage and Harlow, and they were built and put up in a few nights so that the families of workers in a factory, which was there, could live there. And all the women said, I'm terribly lonely. And I said, have they said to the people next door, I'm terribly lonely? And they said, no, of course I haven't. Well, you might get rejected by somebody who thinks, oh God, she's going to be on my doorstep forever. But not necessarily, because people next door are just as lonely as you are. And you can go and sit in the kitchen and have a cup of cocoa and not be lonely. You must say what your weaknesses are if they are to be helped. Well, I am lonely. If I sat in this room and was never invited out, my life in America would have been hardly any better than my life in England. But I've said that I like people. My number is in the phone book. And I said, if you don't have your number in the phone book, you'll get stuck with your friends. And people laugh and think this is what Americans call a one-liner. But it isn't. The only point of fame is that it increases your social horizon. And someone said, oh, it isn't the only thing. It's getting a good table in a restaurant. Well, I'm going to ask you what rubbish that is. My meal was ruined. I had a bad table. I mean, I wouldn't know whether I was at a good or a bad table, and certainly I don't care. But I do know more people. The phone rings, I speak to them, I have a chat, I make jokes, they laugh, they ask me how I am. And if they say come out to lunch, I can go, and that makes an event. And that's what I like. My life is purely social now. I like people. They are my only pastime. Well, I suppose I am self-indulgent, but really only with time. I roll about all day and do nothing. I don't put myself together and do something useful, because I don't see any need to do it. But that is something which I experience all day of every day. There's nothing that I can say, oh, I wish I'd learned hand gliding or something weird like that, because I don't really want it. And I don't want to travel to places that, well, as I say, I can't speak the language or enjoy myself. I'm content with the life I have. When I live in one room, I live by myself. As I say, I never work, I never branch out. I live the life I know, which I feel will not land me in danger or embarrassment or disgrace. That's really my only standard. The way I live my life is probably very sinful to other people, since I'm not doing any good in the world. But I think my sin would be a sin of neglect. I don't do harm to other people, but I don't do any good. And I received a letter the other day saying, I understand you now. You're a lonely, embittered old queen. and you are interested in nothing that means anything to other people. Well, I didn't understand the word embittered because I would have said I was less embittered than most people. But it's true, I'm not interested in the things that interest other people. I'm not interested in sport. I'm not interested in politics. I'm not interested in scandal. And I would say those are the three things that absorb other people. I like any food that is no trouble, that is more or less tasteless. And I could get in what cafe which Mr. Patrick called the Greek place. I think what you would call typical American food, a turkey sandwich, eggs and bacon, corned beef hash, which is a typical American meal. When I was young, someone always said in the middle of a film, I don't know if you think I'm always going to be a hash slinger. Well, I'd never seen anyone slinging hash, but apparently they didn't. And the other thing was, people said, you're nothing but a soda jerk. How do you jerk soda? Well, I think it was those things that you went like that. But I don't much like soda, but I do like corned beef hash, whether it's slung or maybe served. And they're very simple meals that don't demand that you make any, you have to accept the challenge. In Albuquerque, I nearly died of starvation because I couldn't eat the food. It was too hot. And they did cast about and find simple things for me to have. So I don't like vinegar, I don't like garlic, I don't like anything that makes a meal startling. I like ice cream, I like a little ice cream. After that, my mouth freezes up and I don't like it. Simple flavors like vanilla. I don't much like chocolate. And I don't know why I've suddenly become averse to chocolate. Because when I was young, I would eat a whole box of chocolates in the course of an afternoon. But now I couldn't do it. And I eat them. But I don't hanker for them, and I don't, as I say, eat a whole box of candies in an hour, which I used to do. No, I've never bothered about my weight. I don't know whether other people have looked at me and thought, oh, he's getting fat, or he's getting thin. Because in England, your weight is not a problem. It's only a problem in America. Someone said to Mastroianni when he arrived here from Italy, you've lost weight. And he said, you Americans are obsessed with the loss of weight. And the greatest compliment you can pay an American is to say, you look marvelous, show me you've lost weight. And a woman I know who was quite definitely fat said that people were past her and said, lose weight. Stranger. I mean, what's it got to do with anybody else? I suppose you're a nuisance in a crowded subway train, but no, I've never bothered about my weight. I've never bothered what I ate. I've never taken any exercise. I've never tried to improve my appearance from within. So I think I'm comfortable with myself, and what alterations I make, I apply from the outside. I used to dye my hair, I wear makeup, I used to wear nail varnish and so on. So I did care about my appearance, and I changed it from the outside. Yes, I was vain. I think the difference between being vain and being conceited is that if you're conceited, you think you're better than other people. If you're vain, you are, vanity of vanities, all is vanity, said the preacher. That was only emptiness. You see, vanity originally only meant a concern with empty, superficial things. Now it means a concern with your appearance. But I think I am vain, I am concerned with my appearance, but chiefly now for the sake of the world. The world, I think, wishes to see me looking the way I do look, because they like you to be the same. If people feel they can predict you, they feel they own you. And if they feel they own you, they start to like you. My hair is not long enough to cover my head, and if the wind blew, my hair would point in all directions of the compass. So I always wear a hat. And now that's become the part of my image. Marlene Dietrich was the first person I heard use image in the American sense. She said, I dress for the image. And she did. She dressed to please people. She was exotic. My appearance is very much a part of the way I am. What is the most important thing in my life? Myself. Oh, yes? Hello? I'm fine. Oh. Oh, no. Who have you judged? Oh. Yeah. Oh, lovely. Yes, I shall come. That's right. No, I eat anything. No, when I'm by myself I drink whiskey, but I'll drink champagne. That's right. Lovely. I'll try. Goodbye. This is the language I was born to speak, the words that I am doomed to say. I am defenseless, I am weak, and I am gay. I am the harm for which you are not insured, whatever premium you pay. I am the ill of which you can't be cured, and I am gay. I am the flaw within the stone, I am the fissure through the bone. I am the tiny cloud across the sky of evolution's perfect day. I am the great mistake, but I am here to stay.
Hello. Along the lines of poetry, well, I'm Hale. I was acquainted with Quentin. I was working at Allen Ginsberg's office in the early 90s and sort of got into that world there, and that's how I know Philip. And working in the East Village, of course, Quentin was everywhere. We run into him in so many places. But as I was starting to work there, they had just wrapped up doing a fest trip for Alan's 60th birthday, soliciting from interesting people anything they could, stories about Alan, admirations. And I always loved this one from Quentin. It's 1985. So some glasses, and I'm Bill Morgan, Alan's bibliographer, had been putting this together. Thank you, dear Mr. Morgan, for your letter. I'm flattered that you think I could possibly say anything of significance about or to Mr. Ginsberg. I'm also slightly bewildered. I've only met Mr. Ginsberg once for a few minutes while we were fighting over a few scraps of food on the peanut circuit somewhere. I mentioned that in a movie about Mr. Burroughs, he, Mr. Ginsberg, seemed to have been the only person who liked Mr. B. I think we agreed. I've never read a word of Mr. Ginsberg. I've never read a word that Mr. Ginsberg has written because I try not to read anything. And of course, I wish Mr. Ginsberg well, but even that is of no consequence because, as you probably know, I'm well-wishing to the verge of idiocy. I'm sorry to be of so little help, but I hope your project is a wild success. Quentin Crisp. So the following here is an introduction to, is Quentin's introduction to his poetry section of the posthumously published book. And one more thing, it's the companion book to Quentin's final work, The Last Word, an autobiography, which Phillip Ward published in 2017. Quentin's introduction. I don't remember my poems very well, but lately I have been trying to remember them. You see, through discussions with Mr. Ward, I'm beginning to revive them from a long ago past. I thought that maybe they could be made into a slender volume, but there's only a small number of them I can remember. So instead, I've gathered what I can remember here for inclusion in this book. There were a lot more, but alas, I can't remember them all. So I think it's fascinating. I guess that really means he's doing all of these from memory. This is not known for writing things down. So we'll start with the racket. If I had deigned to guzzle at the plate, whose contents seemed egregiously to please, a squalid world that I have come to hate, or tried to run its race with muddled knees and absolutely no hope of success, could I at last, perhaps with great ease, outstretch my feeble hand and try to bless that world that said my love was a disease? Would I have ever written nobler lines than these? The wounded. What shall we say, who cringed and lived, to those who fought and died, and what excuses shall we give? What can we hide? If there's a heaven, there they live, our hell is at their side. Whether they blame or worse forgive, where can we hide? What shall we do that will assuage for those who did not die, their pain, their blindness, lameness, and their rage? That it was in vain? There are no words that we can give to those who fought and died, to beg for pardon that we live. Where can we hide? My secret passion. I thought I'd tell the people about my secret passion to clear the air I like to share. Besides, it was in fashion. So first I told my doctor. His words were not unkind. He said, I'm sure we'll find a cure, and patted my behind. And then I told my mother. I thought she would be glad. She cried a lot and said, do not say anything to Dad. But still I told my father. His lips began to foam. He paced the floor and cursed and swore and said, you can't come home. Then I told my cronies. Their attitude was critical. They murmured, dearie, this is dreary. Please don't get political. At the last I told my boyfriend. It roused his deepest fears. Before he fled, he turned and said, I draw the line at queers. Thank you, Quentin.
Good evening, I'm Jennifer Barton, and I've so enjoyed getting to know Quentin Crisp over the last 25 years when I arrived in New York and he was part of the fabric of the city. So thank you for inviting me. 3 poems to read. The Music of Dilius. Under the transverse gloom of ruined sound, a flute note rose and traveled on alone, toward a sea, moon gray and with no tide, girding the land, this land shall someday be. With naked feet upon the moon-gray ground, over recumbent columns of blurred stone, over my statue lying on its side, I followed soundlessly. And, standing always on the moon-gray shore, I knew the reason why I lived and died and wept, and then not minded what I knew, and then forgot and only watched the sea. And no sail chipped its rim forevermore, and no wind ever blew. Precious stone. Spring comes when spring comes, never anymore, over the barren plowland of my years. But I, who always feared the spring before, have found at last an ending to all fears. When God, with knotted winds across the sky, scourges the white or weeping clouds of rain, or from the bed from which it loved to lie, drags by its emerald hair the sleeping grain, convulses in the agony of birth trees that were old and only longed to die, or with a rash of flowers infects the earth, these things are like a rainbow in the sky. If God ordained all this, did he ordain that I, who wanted love, should be alone? I am some kindred miracle of pain. I asked for bread, he gave me precious stone. I will make music. I will make endless music, syncopated, shrill, sad music out of English speech. Your ears, to calumny habituated, more euphonic phrasing might not reach. I will make endless music till the lonely limits of our torment have been told, that all may hear and some not only hearken, but be heartened and consoled. I will make endless music, say not that the world's ears are waxed or numb, because I will not, dare not, may not see you suffer and be dumb. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jack Waters, and I am very honored and very proud to stand on the shoulders of Quentin Crisp, especially to follow the example of being a gadfly and a troublemaker. Especially, to have lived a period where you could see a personality of such renown as Quentin on the street, as other people have said, any day and say hello. And they'd say hello back and they'd be happy to be recognized and not be afraid that they'd get shot. Things have changed. I want to take this opportunity to remember my eldest sister, Linda Richardson Waters, Linda Waters Richardson, who taught me and introduced me to the theater. In fact, one of her early appearances was in the play The Blacks by Jean Genet, whose production is on the wall in this theater. Never and never. Never imagine that happiness is out there. It is always in here. Never try to be unlike other people. Only strive to be more and more like yourself. Never tell your mother anything. Whatever you say will one day be used against you. never work. In fact, before you do anything, always ask yourself one question. Can I possibly get out of this? No regrets. I never say no. I can't say no. I never say no to anything, because I am told that as I lie dying on an iron bedstead in a rented room, I shall not regret anything I did. I shall regret what I didn't do. So I do anything so as to regret very little. Like Madame Piaf, I shall have no regrets. So the following poem was published in March 1920 in Kingswood House School Magazine. Quentin was 12 years old. Come and try too. Keep up to the mark and don't get slack. Intelligence here we ought not to lack. Never be feeble and never be slow. Girls and women are, that you know. Sums and French are a bit of a fag when you feel you'd rather be having a rag. Of course, you know this cannot be done. Out of school is the time for fun. Drawing's the nicest thing to do. Oh, sorry. Drawing's the nicest thing in the day. Hours and hours at that, I could stay. Other lessons are not so bad. Used up are our brains, so when finished, we're glad. Still, it's all right, not too much to do. Everyone else ought to come and try too. Thank you.
Hello. I'm Peter Cramer. And I'd just like to say I met Phillip in 2010 when he presented a facsimile of Quentin's apartment for the Mix Festival at Theatre for the New City. And for those that are unaware, there is now a reboot of that queer experimental film festival that also opens tonight and is for the next 3 days at the Quad Cinema. So now that I've told you, please go to Mix NYC and support Mix 2.0 because it's the longest running queer experimental film festival here in New York City. We'll drink to whiskey and drink to gin that rot your guts and impair your skin and color your eyeballs pink. We'll say we're drinking to life and love, but really we'll drink to drink. Let everyone lift his glass above and give it a friendly clink. We'll say we're drinking to life and love, but really we drink to drink. We'll say we're drinking to absent friends, to comrades meeting and journey's ends. Who cares if they swim or sink? We'll say we're drinking to life and love, but really we drink to drink. We'll say that we drink to drink. Kingdom for a hat. Thank you.
Well, I've only made 2 decisions for myself in my whole life. To leave home when I was 22 and to leave England when I was 72. And both were like stepping off a cliff in the dark and going down. But I survived. You see, my parents weren't worried by my sin. I never heard the word homosexual till I was about 19. They were worried by my unemployability. What was I to do? So when I went into the world, I wrote books, I illustrated books and did book covers. I taught tap dancing, remaining 1 tap ahead of the students because I was learning it while I was teaching them. And I was a model in the art schools. I had no ability for any of those things. But what else could I do? Because it may be true that artists adopt a flamboyant appearance. But it's also true that people who look funny get stuck with the arts.
When you get up in the morning, what do you do?
First of all, I scratch myself all over because I have eczema so badly that I'm tortured by it. And then when I've calmed down, I don't wash because I'm told if I wash, it will exacerbate my eczema. So I start to put on, what do I do first? First of all, I put on a minimum of clothes, underclothes and things like that. Then when I've got them on, I start to make up my face, which consists of powdering it very lightly and then putting a minimum amount of rouge on with a brush. Never put on makeup by going like this, because you'll ruin your face. You paint it on. And then I darken my eyelids. And I draw a line across them, and I black my eyelashes. And I darken my eyebrows. And I put on lipstick. And then I put on my outer clothes. My shirt, my scarf, my trousers. I put on my shoes and my teeth last, because they hurt most. And then I'm ready. I go out, usually to meet an appointment of someone who has said, let's go to lunch. I cannot invite them to lunch, because then I would have to pay. So when someone says, let's go to lunch, I say yes. No, I've been invited out, so I don't have to pay. And in this way, I can have a meal a day.
When was your first sexual experience?
Oh, I should think I was about 19 or 20 when I started to walk about the West End without my parents and wearing makeup. I met various people, and I should think I had very sort of snatch and grab sexual experience. In fact, I think the only words of love that I've ever heard are the words spoken by anyone who had my elbow in his grip and came to a dark doorway and said, "This will do." My life was a question of gender. I didn't want to be a man. I didn't want to compete with men. I didn't want to be involved in sport, which men are interested in pathologically. Well, you see, people say to me, when did you come out? And I say, I never came out because I was never in. When I was a child, I waltzed around the house in clothes that I'd found in an attic belonging to my mother or my grandmother, saying, "Today I am a beautiful princess." What my parents thought, I can't imagine. But I never realized that I was ludicrous. Although my brothers and my sister laughed at me all day long, I thought it was just them. And I've never changed. I realize I've always lived in a dream in which I was a woman. And my appearance is not an endeavor to look unlike other people. It's an endeavor to look more like myself than nature had made me. You see, the difference between gay men and lesbians is that gay men want to be happy. Lesbians only want to be right. I came to America when I was 72. I mean, it was a terrible risk. I couldn't apply for a job at the age of 72, but I've never worked in the 18 years that I've lived in America. I've lived like Mademoiselle Dubois, on the kindness of strangers. I came first to America at the invitation of Mr. Bennett, who wanted to make my life story into a musical, which I would have loved. But my agent said it was not to be, and it was never done. And then, but once I'd seen New York, I wanted it. You see, I've always been American in my heart, ever since my mother took me to the cinema. My mother took me to the pictures in a spirit of ostentatious condescension. The movies were for servant girls. People with any taste went to the theater. But when I began to gibber and twitch at the sight of New York on the screen, my mother explained that what went on up there was vastly different from what happened in real life. And she was wrong. Because everyone who comes from London to New York and goes back says one thing first. It's more like the movies than you'd ever dream. And it is. They really do bring the dining room chairs out onto the pavement and sit there mopping their necks with Kleenex and saying, it isn't the heat, it's the humidity. Just as they do in the movies. You see, my popularity is founded entirely on a misunderstanding. In America, I'm some kind of a national hero. But really, I was no such thing. I was a hopeless case. I couldn't have disguised myself as a human being. It would have been impossible. And if I had, people would have said, who does he think, oh, I beg your pardon, who does she think she is kidding? And so I went on in the only way I knew how to go on. And it was considered a gesture. But really, I was stuck with it. I try to take no notice. I try not to lean on it. They asked Betty Davis whether her fame was any good, and she said, it's useful at airports. And what she meant, I don't know, but I hope she didn't mean she got people turned off airplanes so that she could get on them. But I try never to assume anything. And in that way, I don't make many mistakes, or don't notice that I've made mistakes. But when you're on stage, I suppose you know that you're only there because you're a mini celebrity, and you have to make the most of it. And that's what you do, whether you're a celebrity or not. You'll have to get them to like you.
How do you feel you get people to like you? I'm very curious.
Well, I don't really know. In the same way that I don't know why I'm a mini celebrity. I mean, I'm a man who can be seen to wear makeup. That's not enough. It's so strange. Someone said to me, are you famous? And I said, I'm famous from Houston Street to 14th. Because I have lived there for 18 years and I'm not inconspicuous. But how I'm known to other people. A man wrote to me from Orkney, which is an island off the north of Scotland. Where would it all end?
Hello, my name is Jorge Clar. When I first moved to New York, I looked up
Mr. Crisp's number in the phone book, and I jotted it down because I had heard that anyone who called and invited him for lunch, he would say yes. But I never had the nerve to actually call him. A few years after, I was working at Penguin Books, and we published one title, several of his titles, but Resident Alien was the book that was published while I was there. And I was asked to help in the book signing. So I was passing the books to Quentin for him to sign, and he was very kind. This is called Drag Queens and Performers. Though the saying goes, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, I think it's important to note that flattery is very different from giving a compliment. Flattery is superficial. A true compliment is heartfelt. Anyway, no one's ever tried to be like me, I'm happy to say, so I've never been flattered in that way. And since I think you should have a style which precludes imitation, my lack of imitators could mean that I've been successful in this effort. The stars of the past were, I think, encouraged to foster their idiosyncrasies, to become more like themselves. And, of course, the imitators settled on them because they became so easy to imitate. Mae West and Betty Davis being just two examples. Nowadays, you have actresses who cannot be imitated because they're so different from film to film. They are actually allowed to act, which is probably a win for entertainment. However, I don't think people should assume that you are making fun of somebody just because you are imitating them. That seems to me very sad and quite mistaken. People imitate others because they like them. It would take a very strange individual to imitate someone they didn't like, because surely they would hate themselves all the time they were doing it. I do think imitators can be bitchy, however, and I don't think that's all right. I don't think you should imitate people so as to exaggerate their mannerisms into absurdity. But then, I don't approve of bitchiness of any kind. So why should I approve of that? I don't think I've ever been bitchy. I've tried not to be. I can't say I haven't been, but since I despise it in other people, I've tried my best to expunge it from my own actions. Bitchiness is merely to make a joke at someone else's expense. And of course, the only people who laugh at those are whomever isn't offended. Charles Pierce was an imitator, and I liked him because he always acknowledged me if I was in the audience. He imitated various people, but he was stuck with the people of his own generation. He imitated Tallulah Bankhead, but now no one can remember who Tallulah Bankhead was. That put him in a very difficult position, but I liked his shows. And I do love Joey Arias. Joey Arias is everywhere. Whenever I go to a place, he's always there. And when he came to interview me for a film made by a German director, he came disguised as himself. And he looked so different that I wouldn't have known him had he not introduced himself to me. He was a nice-looking, blonde young man with a white face
a mulberry-colored mouth, and a black wig. All that added on to make him a mask. Not merely made up, but an actual mask, almost. And why he does that, I don't know, but I should think it's grown on him. At first, he was just made up, and then he was more made up, and then he was made up so much that he was Joey Arias. He's wonderful. I don't think Mr. Arias could portray me in a movie, however, but he could if he appeared as himself. The thing is, I've never done drag. I've only once worn women's clothes, and that wasn't in order to appear as a drag queen. It was to appear as a woman, which is different. When you want to wear drag, you want to make fun of women. I wanted to be a woman, which is altogether different. Boy George is something of an imitator. I admire Boy George because he was only about 22 when he was asked all the difficult questions. He was asked whether he preferred the company of men or women, and he said, "I like to be with the people who like to be with me." That, of course, is what most people feel. I can't imagine anyone looking at their life and saying, "I don't know enough women, I must find some acceptable women." Instead, you end up knowing the people who turn up and never leave. Hopefully, because they like spending time with you. Thank you.
I have been forbidden to describe this occasion as a straight talk from a bent speaker. So instead, we'll say it's like a sermon from a priest who is more sinful than you are. I am here to try to cure you of your freedom, for I am convinced that it is an excess of freedom which has made everybody in the world so miserable. I come from a time where there was so little liberty that if a girl wanted to wear nail varnish, she had to leave home for good. Now you all do, wear, and say whatever you like. But wherever I look, people are not rejoicing. They are complaining. So I must assume that what has made everybody in the world so angry is the element which has been added to their lives in recent times, their freedom. Now, I know it's too late to ask you to abide by restrictions handed down to you by your pastors and your masters and your elders and your betters. What I think we need are chains of our own making. No matter how heavy these may be, they will never feel as irksome as limitations placed upon us by others. And not just any old chains. We must have a system. And this begins with each of us trying to decide what it is that makes him the way that he is. Now, this involves a journey to the interior, not altogether a pleasant experience. Because as well as totaling up what you see to be your assets, you'll also have to take a long, hard look at those things that your friends call the trouble with you. And the synthesis between these two opposite opinions will be your identity. But that's not quite enough. Your identity is like your fingerprints. Now, these too are your very own, but if they are discovered, they may be used against you. Therefore, you will have to polish up your raw identity until it becomes a lifestyle. Something interesting, by which you are prepared, by which you are proud to be identified, and with which you can do barter with the outer world to get from it what you want. I won't say what you deserve, because if we all got what we deserved, we would starve. Now, I know I'm rattling on about problems which by world standards would seem trivial. This I understand. But I do so because never a day goes by, well, never a month goes by, without somebody coming to me and saying, "Oh, you do have a nice life." Me. This would be a reasonable remark if I lived as you do, in mansions riddled with standard of living. But I don't. I live on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, just beyond Redemption, in a small room which has never been cleaned in 18 years. And this brings me to my first message of hope. Never sweep the place where you live, because after the first 4 years, the dirt doesn't get any worse. It's just a question of not losing your nerve. Now, I'm only telling you these things so as to set you free from these boring domestic rituals, so as to give you some time each day when you stop looking outward and start looking inward, so as to decide who you truly are. Now, the next thing that my visitors say is, "Oh, you do know such wonderful people." And I do. But this, too, would only be a logical comment if my room was stuffed with people of wealth and influence. But it isn't. It's crammed with the denizens of the Lower East Side. And this brings me to my second message of hope. Never try to keep up with the Joneses. Drag them down to your level. It's cheaper. And then I am asked, where do I meet these wonderful people? And I say, as a rule, in layabout cafes. Those marvelous places where you could sit through lunch and tea and supper with just one cup of coffee. I used to offer to take my friends to one of these places, but whenever I did so, they would utter the words, "Of course, once we get there, you'll have to tell me what to say." Now, I hope I am painting a thoroughly depressing picture of somebody who has reduced himself to the point to which he envies me, and who seems to be living life like a kidnapped victim, in unwanted isolation, only a few yards from where the traffic of the world is going by, with nothing more substantial boarding up the windows than self-doubt. The words, "You'll have to tell me what to say," are a clue. Now, they show us that we are not just dealing with a dreary old search for true love. The person who wants to make friends doesn't have to think what to say. He has to learn how to listen. Now, we'd all like to have friends, but if it means we've got to listen, the price is ridiculous. So, what does he want? As I see it, he longs for somewhere to go, and wants there for somebody to be. But where and who? When modern man looks round in search of a destiny, nothing presents itself to him as it did when I was young, as being suited to his age, his sex, his station in life. Nowadays, whichever direction he looks in, he finds himself in a landscape without signposts, without milestones, without roads. And the sheer vastness of the terrain that lies before him may make him feel small. Now, if we are to develop a lifestyle, we must banish forever all thoughts which are self-diminishing. We mustn't imagine that anything we discover on that journey to the interior is too trivial or even too distasteful to present to the world. The curiosity of the neighbors about you is a tribute to your individuality, and you should encourage it. By doing this, you'll need never defend yourself. I am appalled by the lust for evasion, which seems to be absolutely everywhere, even among actors, who presumably are a nation of exhibitionists. Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Barton were so great that they brought style to marriage, and then they brought style to divorce. Yet even they expressed the fear that the press photographers of Rome would take pictures of them in the lavatory. Now, the way to deal with that problem is not to build a higher and higher wall around your villa, but to learn to urinate with style. I am told that we live in a sex-ridden society. I would say that we live in a world corroded with envy. This I have no difficulty in substantiating. When I turn on my television, what does it show me? Somebody marching through streets, screeching for equal pay, equal opportunity. Equal is a dead word. Never take as your object in life the desire to be anybody's equal. Once you have entered the profession of being, you have become a professor of a subject on which you are the only living authority. What other people do with their lives, with their style, will not matter. The constant overwatch and perfection of your idea of yourself and the presentation of it, gift-wrapped to the world, that is a unifying and invigorating way of life. And it carries with it a built-in invitation to the party at the end of the world. That glittering occasion at which everybody will be speaking and nobody will be listening. And if you are armed with your style, you will be able to run towards that happy hubbub without the faintest fear that you will be out of your depth, without the faintest doubt but that you will shine. And more important than any of this, the burdens of your sorrowful and angry freedom will fall away from you forever. You will know who you are. You will know where you are going. I'm Brian Edward. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Cynthia Powell. I used to see Quentin around the East Village when I first moved here I first got here in 1987, and he just was this presence of personal style. And I would ride my roller skates around, and he just, we would say hello and look at people. Didn't really say anything, but I remember standing there next to him just watching people go by. I was a little too shy to talk much to him, and that's my memory. And I would see him out sometimes. He would go out sometimes to clubs. So I am reading, What Does It Mean to Be Human? When asked what it meant to be human, I was very sorry that I was not a scholar and had no philosophical point of view to express. More than not being a scholar, I'm not really a human being. I do not mind spending long hours alone, and I never find something to do. This is part of my nature. My sister reminded me before she died that she and my mother sat on each side of the fireplace and occupied themselves with darning socks and knitting and writing letters on their laps. I lay as a child on the rug between them, and once an hour, one of them said, "Why don't you get something to do?" And I said, "Why should I?" That is a question I cannot answer. Why should I have something to do? Of course, there is the theory that time is money. It is an American theory. I am not earning money while I am doing nothing, which is sad. But if I were rich, I would never do anything. I was asked by a paper, if you suddenly had $1 million, what would you do? And I said, go to bed and never get up again. It was a great disappointment to the people who asked me the question. But idleness is my only occupation, and people are my only hobby. If I regard what I think is human, and perhaps I was asked precisely because I am not a human being, and therefore have a detached view of the subject, I would say it was a preoccupation with the idea of death. The reason why people do not live alone and do not spend hours doing nothing is because they can hear time ticking by. Then they develop hobbies, which drive them mad. You may ask them, why do you do this? They ultimately say, well, it helps kill time. I don't want my time dead. Time is meant to be lived. Those who are not hopeless are worried that one day their lives will end. And if you live long enough, of course, you long for it to end. That has been my desire in recent times. I only hope to become extinct. But before that, you must try everything. Have children. Behave in such a way that monuments are built for you. Rule the world. Have streets and theaters named after you. Write your autobiography. These are the ways to stay alive, and this seems to be a preoccupation of being human. When I was younger, I was not ill. I didn't mind how long I lived. Now that every step of my life is painful, I long for death. If being human has any other special aspect, it is that every human being, there are two people. One who sits in judgment of the other. The worldly, the doing person, acts irresponsibly or nobly or wisely or foolishly according to the mood or the situation. But inside him, further away, is an abstract spiritual being who never changes and who sits in judgment of him. This situation becomes evident when we hear people say, I was ashamed of myself. Who is ashamed of whom? It is the duality between the active living organism and the contemplative inner self that sits in judgment that constitutes the whole human being. This is, I think, what constitutes a human being. This is the last poem that Quentin Crisp ever wrote. I am honored to be reading it to all of you.
As Mr. Dickens would have said, 1993 has been the best of times and it has been the worst of times. A regional theme has permeated my year. I have had, as some of you may know, the novel experience of appearing as the Queen of England in a film adaptation of Mrs. Woolf's novel Orlando. The film connects the many moments of English history with what, regrettably, I believe is called gender bending. For you and for your heirs, Orlando, the house.
Your Majesty, I forever.
But on one condition. Do not fade. Do not wither. Do not grow old. Having worn reginal gowns, I begin to understand why Queen Elizabeth I was not always in the best of moods. She was much troubled by relatives and in-laws, often Scottish, many of whom she axed from life, and even more seriously, from the social register. Continuing my honest masquerade, I appear thus to address the entire British nation on Christmas Day. I am, of course, in mufti. But departing from tradition, I will not speak mainly of myself, Britain, or the strangely misnamed Commonwealth. Instead, I will speak of America. I do this because America is the land where, I think, despite all its faults, the best of you should be. Mr. Bush, still president in early 1993, being an elder statesman, wanted everything to stay the same as it had been in the Hollywood sunshine of Mr. Reagan's day. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Clinton have entered the White House, and by political standards, they are a young couple. They watched many episodes of Sesame Street, and they wish for change. For one thing, they want to transform America into a welfare state. They want everyone, however poor, however foreign, however idle, to be eligible for health care. The trouble with this grand notion is that it will cost money, a lot of it. Americans believe in money. The dollar is not just a currency, it is a passion. This being so, it is difficult to find out how they lost so much of it, especially as they did not have Mr. Lamont to guide them. In the early 60s, when the Kennedys reigned from the brittle splendor of their fireproof castle in Camelot, almost every country in the world owed money to the United States. In 30 years, this situation has been allowed to become reversed. Just as the country in general is falling apart, so is New York in particular. Viewed from a distance, it looms up as a magnificent citadel of steel and glass, the Emerald City come to life. But when you live in it, it turns out to be a wreck. If you take a swift taxi drive down Fifth Avenue, your head hits the roof of the cab several times. If Audrey Hepburn today wanted to enjoy breakfast at Tiffany's, she would not choose to arrive at that mecca of diamonds by taxicab. In the early 60s, not only all the money, but also all the power in the world was in the hands of the United States. They could have bombed everything, so that there was only America or ashes. There would have been no more trouble, no more anti-Americanism. The bombing hasn't been done because American politicians were afraid of what the neighbors would say. They want to rule the world and be loved. It can't be done. What made Lady Thatcher so great was that she didn't give a damn whether anybody loved her or not. That was how she became the greatest political star since Mr. Churchill. Like that great figure, she wept only for herself. Now America is not in a sufficiently secure position to bomb the world, so it has decided to save it, which may prove to be just as expensive and will certainly take much longer. Adding to the violence of life in general, women have now decided to become people. This is a change for the worse. Women were nicer than people. If our cities are to be populated entirely by people, life will become faster, louder, harsher. The loudness is already here. No one seems to mind. The American young are violent because they have no inner life. They have no inner life because they have no thoughts. They have no thoughts because they know no words, and they know no words because they never converse. They would not be heard above the din that rocks the dim cellars where they gibber and twitch. They have one word a year which means I don't like this, and another which says I do like this. One season you can be fab, another you can be neat, and yet another you can be cool. When you ask the young in what sense their little friends are cool, they say nothing. They cannot embellish their judgment. Now, all our heroes are either sportsmen whose profession obliges them to charge one another like buffaloes until their injuries compel them to retire, or movie stars who pretend to hit, kick, or shoot one another, or to blow up entire cities. Though I regret all this, it does not in any way lessen my love for America. So far, I have only once been threatened in the streets of Manhattan, whereas in England I never felt safe for a moment. Indeed, it is my impression that everybody in the United States is a friend. In England, nobody is a friend. I left England's lonely streets over 10 years ago. Here, there are no nice people from Tunbridge Wells eager to chill what is left of my marrow with iceberg stares. There are no royal appointments and disappointments. This city instantly embraced me, and I it. I became a naked film critic and, dream of dreams, almost a celebrity.
I saw you on Luke now. I'll go see.
Oh, that.
I saw your miniseries also.
Oh,
You're on cool?
Oh, I don't think so.
BBC.
I have also come to believe wholeheartedly in Mrs. Lazarus's verse inscribed on the base of the Statue of Liberty. If ever there was a husband man, it has to be me. Everyone can see at a glance what a husband man I am. No one draws attention to the fact. Indeed, on occasion, I am permitted to appear in the guise of a VIP. Recently, I attended a secret screening of a movie called Zelda. After the film, the entire audience went to the Algonquin Hotel. There I managed to be photographed with Mr. Fairbanks, and later with Miss Warwick. Neither of these two luminaries had the faintest idea who I am, but neither refused for a moment to raise me to their rarefied level of royal visibility. This is only one sign of American generosity. They are a truly open-handed people, free with their time, their money, and their availability. My advice to the British is pack tonight. Set out tomorrow like the Portuguese explorers of old for the islands of the blessed. We are waiting for you.
thank all of you for coming tonight, and let's have an applause for all of our readers. And I also want to acknowledge Mr. Watson, Stephen Watson. You're in the dark. I'd love people to see you. I want to give you a little bit. I meant to say this earlier, but I got too emotional. I couldn't speak. The movies tonight. The audio in the first movie, my film, Quentin Crisp and A Time Gone By, is audio extracted from the 60-plus hours of audio he and I did in recording for the production of 2 books we had outside, The Last Word and One More Thing. We really wanted the book to be called The Dusty Answers. So the audio from that was taken from all of actually it's the early part of our conversations. The second movie,
Microphone?
Stephen Watson's Quentin Crisp Reflects at 90, artifacts.movie. Go check that website. On Monday the 25th at the Anthology Film Archives, Mr. Watson will premiere the movie. If you'd like to speak about it, Stephen, you're welcome to do that.
Well, so artifacts.movie is a website of oral histories. It's sort of long form, and we're going to premiere with 22 films in 3 series. One is Gender Benders, one is Silver Factory, and one is Underground Press. And beginning on November 25th, these will be available online for free. It's highly navigable, and I really encourage people to look at it.
Now, on Monday the 25th, you're having a reception, is it?
Well, it's a kind of 3-ring circus. I'll be doing a Q&A with Wayne Kestenbaum. There'll be a display of Quentin Crisp's scarves.
The scars that appear in your film.
I'm sorry?
The scars that appear in your film.
Exactly. And Phillip will be there telling the lives of the scarves. There will be a series in the Maya Deren Theatre of underground films, starring Jack Smith and Thomas Meekus and a real variety of things. And there will be music and drink and.
When does that begin? Saturday?
Well, I have to say it's an event where you have to sign up, and already out of 245 places have already been taken. So I mean, if you want, see me afterwards.
Can people go to artifacts.movie and get more information?
Absolutely. That's really what we're.
So it's artifacts.movie.
Yeah, and that will be launching on Monday, and then forever. We hope.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
And one more thing, the last movie, the Alternative Queen's Message. I think it's 1992. It was the first Alternative Queen's Message that was broadcast on BB4. It's broadcast at the same time that the Queen does her first speech to the nation. So this is alternative. And Quentin was the first one to do it. So what you saw tonight was the first Alternative Queen's Message. There's been many more since then. And what's special about seeing it tonight is it's not on YouTube or any media that you can see it. So we have it here tonight thanks to my signable papers so you can see it. So that's the background of the movies. So that concludes everything. And I thank you for coming and making donations to the Gene Frankel Theatre. I have to acknowledge Barry Stockman. He's the fellow who helped make this happen. So feel free to meander around and go buy some books. I have The Last Word and One More Thing available for sale. Thank you.
Thank you.